I never expected to wake up to a nightmare, but at exactly 4:12 a.m. my phone rang, shattering the silence of my Manhattan apartment. Groggy and annoyed, I reached for it, squinting at the screen. Mary Wilson. I hadn't heard from her in months, not since my grandfather's funeral. Something was wrong. I answered, and her panicked voice rushed through the speaker. "Ethan, they're destroying your land. You need to get here, now." I sat up, my heart hammering. "What are you talking about? The farm, Ethan. They're bulldozing everything. It's like a war zone, big yellow machines everywhere, ripping through your grandfather's fields." I swung my legs off the bed, already pulling on jeans. "Who's doing this?" "There's no way the land was sold." "Emerald Hills Development. They put up signs yesterday. 120 luxury homes." I tried to tell them this land isn't theirs, but they ignored me. "Ethan, you have to stop them before it's too late."
I could barely breathe. My grandfather's farm, the land that had been in my family for 4 generations, was being stolen right from under me. But how?
The race back home. By sunrise, I was speeding down the highway, every mile stretching unbearably long. My mind was a battlefield of questions. There had to be a mistake. Grandpa James had been stubborn as a mule. He would never sell the land, not even for millions. He used to say, "This land is more than soil and crops, Ethan. It's our legacy." And yet, someone had claimed to own it. By the time I reached Meadow Creek, my hometown, the air felt different. It wasn't the peaceful countryside I remembered. It smelled like dust, diesel, and destruction. I turned onto the familiar dirt road leading to the farm. But instead of the quiet fields and endless rows of wheat, I was met with a scene straight out of a disaster movie.
A stolen future, my grandfather's land, my land, was being torn apart. Towering bulldozers ripped into the soil like mechanical beasts. Massive excavators gutted the earth where golden wheat once swayed in the wind. Clouds of dirt billowed into the sky as workers in neon vests moved with cold efficiency, erasing a century of history in mere minutes. A massive billboard loomed over the destruction. "Welcome to Emerald Hills, luxury homes starting at $500,000. I slammed the brakes so hard my car skidded sideways. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a takeover. Shoving the door open, I stormed toward the nearest group of workers. "Hey, who gave you permission to do this?" A few glanced at me but kept working. Then I saw her, a woman in pristine beige slacks and a crisp white blouse, standing apart from the chaos, barking orders into her phone. Even in the dust-choked air, her hair was perfectly styled, her nails polished.
She wasn't just anyone. She was in charge. I marched straight towards her. "Excuse me," I said, barely restraining my anger. "What the hell is happening here?" She gave me a glance that lasted exactly 1 second, just enough to assess me, dismiss me, and go back to her call. I ripped the phone from her hand. "Hey!" she snapped, furious. "Who are you?" I demanded. She straightened, smoothing out an invisible wrinkle in her blouse before giving me a practiced, insincere smile. "Vanessa Holloway," she said coolly, "president of the Emerald Hills Homeowners Association." She extended her hand. I ignored it. "This is my land," I growled. "You have no right to be here." She sighed, shaking her head like I was some misinformed child. "I see. You must be Ethan Carter. There's been a misunderstanding. This property was legally purchased over a year ago. Everything is in order." My blood turned to ice. I shook my head. "That's impossible. My grandfather never sold this land." "Perhaps he didn't tell you," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "The sale was finalized months before his passing. Maybe he didn't want to upset you." Lies. I knew my grandfather. He would never sell this land without telling me. Something was wrong, very wrong.
The first clue. "Show me the documents," I demanded. Vanessa pulled a business card from her pocket and handed it to me with an infuriatingly serene expression. "You're welcome to contact our legal department," she said, "but I assure you, Mr. Carter, everything is perfectly legitimate." She turned on her heel, already dialing another number. I watched in stunned silence as my land continued to be ripped apart before my eyes. I clenched my fists. No, something wasn't adding up.
I wouldn't let this slide. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to start.
A ghost from the past. Back at my grandfather's old farmhouse, Mary Wilson was waiting for me. She was sitting on the porch, a glass of iced tea trembling in her wrinkled hands. "They started coming a few months ago," she murmured. "Surveyors, developers. Your grandpa was furious. He kept saying they had no right, that they were stealing what wasn't theirs." I swallowed hard. "Did he ever mention selling?" I asked. Mary shook her head. "Never! James swore this land would stay in your family forever." A cold weight settled in my stomach. My grandfather knew something was wrong, and now it was up to me to finish what he started. I pushed open the door to his old study. The room smelled of pipe tobacco and old books. His desk, untouched since his passing, stood like a silent witness. Somewhere in this house, my grandfather had left me a clue, and I was going to find it, no matter what.
The farmhouse smelled like time itself had stopped. Dust clung to the wooden furniture, and the faint scent of my grandfather's old pipe lingered in the air. I stood in his study, staring at his desk, the same one he had sat behind for decades, meticulously recording every harvest, every sale, every decision about the land. Somewhere in this house was the truth. I pulled out the chair, running my fingers along the worn wooden surface. This wasn't just a desk, it was a vault of history. And if my grandfather had suspected something before he died, he would have left behind a clue. I started searching.
The first clue. I rifled through the drawers, flipping through old tax forms, farming logs, and newspaper clippings. Nothing. Then I found a small locked metal box at the back of the bottom drawer. I turned the desk upside down, feeling along the wood, and found it, a tiny key taped under the drawer. My pulse quickened. I unlocked the box and slowly lifted the lid. Inside, neatly arranged, were three things: a set of yellowed property surveys, dating back to 1912 and updated in 1978. A letter, handwritten in my grandfather's precise script, addressed to me. A folded map, edges frayed from time. I unfolded the letter first. "Ethan, if you're reading this, then my worst fear has come true. For years they've been watching this land, trying to steal it from under us. They think they're smarter than an old farmer, but I know their game. They want me to sign it all away, piece by piece, little by little, but I never did. If they claim I sold anything, they're lying. Look at the original survey from 1912 and compare it to what's in the county records now. The truth is in the boundaries. Protect our land, Ethan. They'll come for you next." A chill ran down my spine. I turned to the survey maps. My grandfather had marked them with red ink, circling a massive discrepancy in the eastern boundary. According to these documents, our land didn't just stop at the fields. It stretched 100 acres further east, far beyond where I thought the property line was. And that meant part of the existing Emerald Hills development was illegally built on our land. This wasn't just about the new construction site. They had already stolen from us years ago. The man who knew too much, I needed proof, legal proof, and I needed someone who could help me decipher these maps. I thought of Walter Henderson, a property lawyer in town. I had met him briefly before when handling my grandfather's estate, but at the time I didn't think I'd ever need him again. I was wrong. His office was in an old brick building downtown, lined with faded law books and framed certificates. Walter himself looked like he had stepped out of a different century. Thick glasses, a bow tie, and a habit of rubbing his chin whenever he was deep in thought. I spread out the documents across his desk. "Walter, I need you to look at these," I said. "I think my grandfather's land was stolen piece by piece, and I need to prove it." He adjusted his glasses, tracing the boundary lines with his finger. His brows knit together in concentration. "This is highly unusual," he muttered. "Unusual how?" I asked. Walter pulled out a modern county map from his drawer, laying it side by side with my grandfather's old survey. He compared the lines, then exhaled sharply. "According to these original documents," he said, "your property extends nearly half a mile further east than what's currently recorded. That includes not just the construction site, but also the existing Emerald Hills clubhouse and about 20 homes." My stomach twisted. "They built on land they never owned," I murmured. Walter nodded. "And if that's the case, They've been collecting HOA fees on properties they had no legal right to manage. Can we fight this? Walter took a deep breath. We'll need to verify these maps with a licensed surveyor, and we need to petition the court to recognize the original boundaries. But be warned, this won't be easy. The people behind Emerald Hills are powerful. They won't go down without a fight. I already knew that, and I was ready for them. The shadow behind Emerald Hills. While Walter prepared the legal filings, I drove to the county records office. I spent hours digging through land records, zoning applications, and development permits. And that's when I found something disturbing. Emerald Hills wasn't just one company. It was a tangled web of LLCs and shell corporations. But the same 6 names kept appearing over and over again. Vanessa Holloway, HOA President Mark Peterson, County Commissioner Richard Langley, Director of Zoning and Planning, Thomas Holloway, Vanessa's husband, real estate investor James Crawford, attorney for Emerald Hills, Henry Whitmore, owner of the surveying firm that adjusted the property lines in 1997. They weren't just developers. They were a network of insiders manipulating the system for profit. And the final piece of evidence? A loan approval form dated just 3 months ago, $16 million loan granted to Emerald Hills Development. Collateral, the land currently being disputed. My land. They had borrowed millions of dollars against property they never legally owned. If I exposed them, it wouldn't just stop the development. It would destroy them. The warning. As I left the records office, my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Walk away, Ethan. This fight isn't worth your life. A cold sweat broke across my skin. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was a war, and they were willing to do anything to keep their secret buried. I took a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel as I drove back to the farmhouse. If they thought I was going to roll over and let them take what was mine, they had badly underestimated me. I had the truth. Now I just needed a plan. The warning text replayed in my mind over and over again. Walk away, Ethan. This fight isn't worth your life. Whoever sent it wasn't bluffing. I had rattled the wrong people, and now they were going to make me pay for it. The chase. The sun had just set when I left the county records office, my mind spinning with the weight of everything I had uncovered. The forged documents, the insider deals, the $16 million loan secured with stolen land. I had enough evidence to bring the entire Emerald Hills empire crashing down. I was halfway home when I noticed it. A black SUV. At first I thought it was just another car, but when I took a right onto the winding country road leading to my grandfather's farmhouse, the SUV followed. Then I slowed down. So did they. A knot formed in my stomach. I hit the gas. The SUV did the same. They weren't just following me, they were hunting me. I gripped the wheel as I flew down the dark road, trees blurring past me. My heart pounded in my chest. Then, bam! The SUV slammed into my back bumper. My car lurched forward, tires screeching against the pavement. Another hit, harder this time. I struggled to control the car as the road curved sharply ahead. If I lost control here, I'd be dead. I had seconds to react. My grandfather's old farm roads were etched into my memory, and just up ahead was an abandoned side path leading into the woods. At the last second, I yanked the wheel hard to the right. My tires hit the gravel, kicking up dust as I veered onto the hidden road. The SUV shot past, overshooting the turn. I didn't stop. I drove straight into the woods, headlights off, my car bouncing over rough terrain. I didn't know who was behind the wheel of that SUV, but I knew one thing for sure. They wanted me dead. A dark message. I made it back to the farmhouse an hour later, my nerves shot, my hands still shaking on the wheel. Mary Wilson was waiting on the porch, a worried look on her face. "You okay, Ethan?" I nodded, but my expression must have said otherwise. She sighed, looking around. "They were here," my breath caught. "What?" Mary nodded toward my front door. The wood was splintered near the lock. Someone had tried to break in. I sprinted inside. My grandfather's office was trashed. Papers were scattered across the floor. The metal box where I had found the deed was gone. They took everything: the surveys, the maps, the letter from my grandfather. My stomach twisted. I still had pictures of the documents, but the originals were now in the enemy's hands. Then I noticed something new: a knife stabbed into the wooden desk. A single piece of paper was pinned beneath it. One word was scrawled across the page in bold red ink: "Leave." I clenched my fists, anger burning through my veins. They thought they could scare me into running. They thought wrong. The next move. I needed a plan. I still had the county records, the shady business dealings, and the $16 million loan as leverage. But I needed more. I needed a witness. Someone on the inside who could confirm what I already knew. Someone who was tired of playing by Vanessa Holloway's rules. And I knew exactly where to start. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to Gerald Fisher's house, the whistleblower. Gerald Fisher had been the HOA treasurer for years. He was one of Vanessa's closest allies, until now. When he answered the door, he looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder before motioning for me to come inside. "I shouldn't be talking to you," he muttered. "Then why did you let me in?" I shot back. Gerald hesitated, then sighed. "Because what they're doing isn't right." I pulled out my phone and showed him the financial records I had uncovered. "I know about the money, Gerald," I said. "I know about the fake property lines, the illegal approvals, the HOA fees that disappeared." His face paled. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, voice shaky. "Cut the crap," I snapped. "They're going to take the fall eventually. The question is, do you want to go down with them?" Silence. Then, finally, he exhaled and ran a hand over his face. "Okay," he whispered. "I'll tell you everything. The truth unfolds." Gerald opened his laptop and pulled up HOA financial records, internal emails, and meeting minutes. I leaned in, scanning the screen as he talked. HOA dues were funneled into private accounts. Fake maintenance fees were charged to homeowners. Thousands of dollars in consulting payments went directly to Vanessa's husband. But the biggest bombshell: the HOA had been using aggressive fines and legal loopholes to force homeowners to sell their properties at below market value. Vanessa would push residents out, buy their homes dirt cheap through shell companies, then resell them at massive profits. "She threatened me too," Gerald admitted. "Told me if I ever crossed her, I'd regret it." I stared at him. "Why are you helping me now?" Gerald sighed. "Because I saw how scared she was when you showed up at that meeting. You're the first person who's ever fought back." I nodded. "Then let's finish this. The trap is set." I left Gerald's house with everything I needed: the financial records, the proof of illegal property seizures, the insider testimony. The only thing left was to take the fight to Vanessa Holloway. I checked my phone. Walter had already filed the injunction to stop construction, which meant Vanessa's empire was hanging by a thread. Tomorrow night, the entire HOA would meet at the community centre. Vanessa would be there, standing in front of her supporters, acting like she was untouchable. And I was going to expose her in front of every single one of them. The air inside the Emerald Hills Community Centre was thick with anticipation. Rows of neatly arranged chairs were filled with homeowners, most of them oblivious to the corruption happening right under their noses. Some were sipping from plastic cups filled with cheap punch, chatting about landscaping regulations and HOA fees. At the front of the room, standing beside a massive projector screen displaying polished marketing slides of luxury amenities, was Vanessa Holloway. She looked every bit the powerful HOA president. Draped in an expensive crimson blazer, her platinum hair perfectly styled, her practiced smile radiating confidence. She had no idea that tonight her empire was about to crumble. The grand entrance. I stepped through the doors, heart pounding, carrying a folder stuffed with evidence. Gerald Fisher, the HOA treasurer turned whistleblower, had already arrived, standing nervously near the back of the room. He gave me a tight nod. Everything was set. Vanessa, oblivious to my presence, clicked the remote in her hand, changing the slide to a shimmering 3D rendering of a new golf course. "Just imagine," she purred into the microphone. "Emerald Hills will soon be the premier luxury neighborhood in Meadow Creek. Our homes will be worth so much more once these new features are complete." The audience clapped enthusiastically. A few people even whistled. I waited for the noise to settle before stepping forward. "Excuse me," I said, loud enough to turn every head in the room. Vanessa's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered. "Ah, Mr. Carter, what a surprise. Unfortunately, we're in the middle of a meeting. If you have concerns, I'd be happy to schedule a private—" "This won't take long." I walked straight up to the stage. Then I turned to face the crowd. "My name is Ethan Carter. My grandfather, James Carter, owned the land that your homes were built on. And tonight I have something to show you." Murmurs spread through the room. Vanessa stiffened. I pulled out the first document. "This," I said, holding it up, "is the original land survey from 1912. And this," I held up another page, "is the survey from 1978. I walked to the HOA board members seated behind Vanessa and placed copies in front of each of them. "Put simply," I continued, "you're building on land that legally belongs to me." Silence. Then, chaos. Gasps, shouting. People stood from their seats, confusion turning into panic. Someone knocked over a chair. Cracks in the foundation. "This is ridiculous," Vanessa shouted over the noise. She grabbed one of the surveys, flipping through it like she could make it disappear just by staring hard enough. "We have permits. We've sold lots. Construction has already started." "Your permits," I said calmly, "are based on fraudulent property lines." I turned to the audience. "I filed an injunction to stop all building immediately. That means," I let the weight of my words settle, "anyone who bought into the new development has just purchased land that was never legally for sale." A collective gasp rippled through the room. A man in the back stood up. "Are you saying my house isn't actually mine?" Before I could answer, Gerald Fisher stepped forward. "There's more," Gerald said, his voice shaking but steady. Vanessa whipped around to glare at him. "Gerald," she hissed, "sit down." But he didn't. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out printed financial records. "The HOA board has been stealing from you," he said, "charging you illegal fees, funneling your money into private accounts, lying about maintenance costs." The crowd erupted again. Shouts of "What?" and "Where did our money go?" filled the air. Vanessa's perfectly composed mask cracked. She slammed her hand onto the podium. "This meeting is over," she snapped. "Everyone out!" But no one moved. Instead, they turned on her. The final blow. I waited for the noise to die down. Then I pulled out one final document. I walked up to Vanessa, locking eyes with her. "One last thing," I said. "According to these legal boundaries—" I let the pause stretch. "Your personal house, Vanessa," I let the words sink in, "sits entirely on what is legally my land." The entire room fell silent. Vanessa froze. For the first time, fear flickered in her eyes. The woman who had built an empire by scaring others was now trapped. "That's impossible," she whispered. I tapped the page. "You're welcome to try and fight it in court." Gerald leaned in. "I hope you enjoy paying yourself rent." The aftermath. The meeting ended in chaos. Homeowners were yelling, demanding answers. Some were already talking about lawsuits. I stepped outside, the night air cool against my skin. My phone buzzed, a text from Walter, my lawyer. "They're cornered, but be ready. They won't go down without a fight." I exhaled. I knew Walter was right. Vanessa was too connected, too powerful to go down without trying something desperate. And when people are desperate, they become dangerous. I turned to see Vanessa standing at the doorway, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. When she saw me watching, she smiled, not a defeated smile, a calculated one. She walked over, stopping just a few feet away. "You think you've won?" she said quietly. I folded my arms. "I think I've just started." Vanessa tilted her head. "Let me explain how this works." Her voice dropped lower. "The county commissioner? He's my husband's golf partner. The building inspector's daughter works for my real estate company. The local judge, he comes to my dinner parties. She leaned in closer. You have no idea who you're messing with, Ethan. I smirked. And you, I said, have no idea what my grandfather left me. Her eyes narrowed. You'll regret this. I stepped back. We'll see. As I turned to leave, I could feel her watching me. I wasn't naive, she wasn't done yet, and I needed to be ready for whatever came next. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Vanessa Holloway's smug expression, her whispered threat playing on a loop in my head. You have no idea who you're messing with, Ethan. I had expected her to fight back. I just hadn't expected her to do it this fast. By 7:00 a.m., my phone buzzed with a call from Walter Henderson. His voice was clipped, urgent. They filed a counter-lawsuit. Fraud allegations. They're claiming your documents are fake. I exhaled sharply. How bad is it? Bad, he sighed. They got a judge, one of Vanessa's friends. He fast-tracked the hearing. 3 months from now. Until then, they can keep building. My grip tightened around my phone. They were trying to run out the clock. If they kept building while the case dragged on, by the time a ruling was made, it would be too late. Too many homes would already be sold, too much money at stake. I had to stop them before that happened. The power play. By noon, Walter and I were sitting across from Vanessa's legal team in a sleek high-rise office downtown. Across the table, Vanessa looked as composed as ever, her red blazer immaculate, her hands folded neatly on the polished mahogany surface. Beside her sat James Crawford, her pit bull attorney, a man whose reputation for burying opponents in endless litigation was legendary. Walter wasted no time. The original property surveys are legitimate, he said, sliding the documents across the table. Our client's claim is valid. Your developments are built on stolen land. Crawford smirked. And yet, your client has no official ownership recognized by the county's most recent records. I leaned forward. Because those records were altered illegally. Vanessa laughed softly. You keep saying that, Ethan, she mused. But allegations are just words. Words won't win you this case. I slid another file across the table. Then let's talk numbers instead. Crawford's smirk faltered as he skimmed the contents. Inside was a detailed breakdown of HOA fraud, Gerald Fisher's financial records, evidence of embezzled funds, fake maintenance charges, and money funneled into private accounts. Vanessa's smile finally cracked. You think this intimidates me, she said, voice cold. No, I said, but it will interest the IRS and the FBI. Silence. For the first time, I saw it. Real fear flickering behind Vanessa's eyes. Desperation turns dangerous. I left that meeting knowing one thing. Vanessa wasn't backing down. If anything, she was getting desperate. That night, as I returned to the farmhouse, headlights flared behind me, the same black SUV from before. I barely had time to react before the vehicle accelerated. I swerved, barely dodging the impact. My car skidded off the road, crashing into a ditch. Pain shot through my ribs as the airbags deployed. I groaned, fumbling for my phone, only to see the SUV's door open. A man stepped out. I couldn't see his face, but I knew exactly who had sent him. Vanessa had just made this personal. The man approached, his shadow stretching under the moonlight. And then gunshots. Not at me, at him. A second car roared up the road, headlights blinding. My attacker froze, then bolted back to his SUV, peeling away into the night. I turned to see Gerald Fisher climbing out of the other car, holding a gun with shaking hands. He had just saved my life. Still think this is just a property dispute? He asked breathlessly. I exhaled, heart pounding. This wasn't about land anymore. It was war. Turning the tables. The next morning, I stood in front of the courthouse with one last piece of evidence. Walter filed an emergency motion, not just against the fraudulent land sale, but for criminal investigations into HOA fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. The judge, one not in Vanessa's pocket, reviewed the case. His ruling came swiftly. All construction on the disputed land is to be halted immediately. The court will issue an injunction pending full investigation. I stepped outside, my breath releasing in a slow exhale. For the first time, I had the upper hand. I wasn't just fighting for my grandfather's land anymore. I was about to bring down an empire. The storm had finally arrived. For weeks, Vanessa Holloway had played her game from the shadows, pulling strings, bribing officials, and silencing anyone who dared to stand in her way. But today, the empire she built on lies was about to collapse. The final confrontation. The courtroom was packed. News cameras lined the back walls, journalists whispering into their microphones, waiting for the moment the judge would deliver his final ruling. Vanessa sat at the defendant's table, her once flawless demeanor cracking under the pressure. She was still dressed immaculately, but there was something missing from her usual arrogance. For the first time since this war began, she looked small. The judge cleared his throat and delivered the final verdict. The court finds that the land in question was unlawfully seized through fraudulent means. The existing HOA administration is dissolved effective immediately, and all homeowners are to be provided legal ownership through a revised agreement. Furthermore, evidence of financial misconduct and fraud will be forwarded to the authorities for criminal prosecution. The gavel slammed down, the room erupted. Vanessa's face drained of colour. Her reign was over. She tried to stand, but before she could escape, 2 federal agents approached her. "Ms. Holloway," one of them said, flashing a badge, "you're under arrest for financial fraud, tax evasion, and falsification of government documents." Gasps filled the room. Vanessa turned to me, her eyes burning with something between rage and desperation. "This isn't over," she hissed as they cuffed her wrists. I met her gaze, unshaken. "Yes, it is." The agents led her out, cameras flashing, the headlines already being written. The Queen of Emerald Hills had fallen. A new beginning. The days that followed felt surreal. The once feared HOA was gone. Homeowners no longer lived in fear of random fines and corrupt regulations. They could paint their doors any colour they wanted. They could grow their gardens freely. And most importantly, they finally owned their homes. The land that had been stolen was now rightfully returned. I stood on my grandfather's old porch, looking out at the fields he once walked. Mary Wilson joined me, handing me a glass of lemonade. "Your grandfather would be so damn proud of you," she said, smiling softly. I exhaled, a weight I didn't realize I was carrying finally lifting. "He always told me to protect what matters," I said. Guess I finally understand what he meant. The true price of greed. Vanessa had spent years manipulating the system, believing that power and money would protect her forever. But greed is a strange thing. It makes people reckless. It blinds them to the fact that no empire, no matter how carefully built, can survive if its foundation is rotten. She thought she could buy people. She thought she could control them. But in the end, she underestimated the one thing more powerful than fear: the truth. And the truth had finally caught up with her. A lesson for all of us. This isn't just a story about land. It's a story about standing up when no one else will. About fighting for what's right, even when the odds are against you. Because corruption doesn't just exist in courtrooms and real estate deals. It exists in workplaces, in governments, in daily life. And the people who get away with it are the ones who count on the rest of us being too scared, too tired, or too indifferent to do anything about it. But here's the truth. One person can make a difference. One person asking the right questions. One person refusing to back down. One person standing up so that others find the courage to stand with them. That's how change happens. And if you ever find yourself in a fight like this, remember, you don't have to win alone, but you do have to start. What would you do? If you knew something was wrong, if you saw injustice happening in your own community, would you have the courage to fight it? Would you be willing to stand against the powerful even when it feels impossible? Let's talk in the comments. Share your thoughts. Because these stories aren't just entertainment, they're a reminder of what's possible. And if you want more stories that challenge, inspire, and push you to think differently, subscribe now. Follow the journey. Because this is just the beginning.